Right, can you all hear me? Live. Thank you. Let's see if I can get this to work. So this is as part of this Rio Grande Basin study, which Bureau of Reclamation and MRDCD are fronting through a WaterSmart grant. It's a planning effort to develop climate resilient strategies for the Rio Grande in New Mexico. And it just started this last January. It's meant to be a 3-year project to develop these strategies. The basin study is divided into sectoral committees. It sounds kind of Klingon-like, but agricultural, community orgs, local governments, NGO, and tribal. So the water needs for all sectors are going to be modeled and analyzed to help develop strategies for resiliency. So like reservoir operations, other actions that can help improve the water needs of the sectors. So the sectoral committee has been very active for about 3 years. So we sort of in front of this started preloading this because we felt like this was a really important opportunity to define the water needs for the river. It's never been done in a holistic, whole river sense. So we really embraced this opportunity. And it's really benefited from this World Wildlife Fund report card that Esty mentioned as well, that sort of greased the skids with some other modeling and some information for us. Primary questions. How much water does the river ecosystem need in 6 reaches of the upper Rio Grande in New Mexico? What are the primary ecologic water deficits based on current and projected future conditions? Current conditions and projected future conditions, just to be clear about that. What activities will lessen these deficits within current constraints? And we also want to consider some out-of-the-box ideas as well. The process, so this is pretty apologies, pretty text-heavy presentation here, but the process that we have developed is based on this structure for the Rio Chama E-flow hypothesis. And I'll show you this in a second here. It was developed by Mike Harvey, Dagmar Llewellyn, and Steve Harris as part of the E-flow project for the Rio Chama below El Vado. And all our hypotheses are tied to gauges. And we tie them to gauges so we can use that data to compare and contrast. We utilize all available resources, hydrologic information, geomorphic information, ecologic information, and we're gathering citations and expert opinions. The sectoral committee teams are developing these initial hypotheses for the different reaches now through the spring of 2024 and compiling citations and identifying uncertainties. Mark Briggs has been hired. This has been through a grant from the Bureau of Land Management and the Turner Foundation, which is great. Mark Briggs has done a lot of this kind of work. And he is actually compiling all this stuff into a draft report that's going to be available for review. And we want to get this out for review. So I'm sort of putting a plug in, so bugging people's ears. We want to get this out and get information. What citations are we missing? Where were we off? Where numbers could be tweaked here and there. And then we want to hold a peer review workshop in summer of 2024. And during this workshop, we kind of want to have the numbers somewhat vetted going into it so we could spend the bulk of the workshop talking about strategies and what can be done, what are the constraints, talking with water managers, what are the constraints in the different reaches, and where is there feasible actions. And then we hope to have this document finalized by fall of 2024. Here's what an outline looks like. I think it's going to be a very useful document on many fronts. We're using it for the basin study, but it could be used for if you're working within a given reach to understand that reach better. It's going to have the methods explicitly detailed on what we've done, what environmental flows are, the basin, the river, indicator species. I'll talk more about this in a second. This approach that we're taking. The 6 study reaches, and for each reach we'll have information about that reach and the current conditions, and e-flow recommendations and constraints. And then we'll talk more generally about constraints, challenges, and opportunities. That's the outline of this report. It's already a big report, so it's going to be a volume to have on your desk, by your bedside. I don't know, okay. This is a really wonderful team effort, okay? So we have a steering committee, myself, Mark Briggs, Trish Snyder with Mexico Wild, Enrique Prunes with World Wildlife Fund, and Brian Richter. And Brian Richter, I don't know if you Google environmental flows, he's really the guru on this subject, so it's really a thrill to be working with Brian directly on this process. The author compilation is Mark Briggs. We have reach teams, and these are made up of the different NGOs that are part of this NGO sectoral committee, including Martha, who's here today. And then expert input. We're pulling in as we're doing each reach and working through each reach. We're pulling in different experts, people like Kim or Rich or Steve Harris or Dagmar, pulling those, Mickey Porter, Joel S., we're pulling them in for getting their opinions if we're heading in the right direction with understanding what the flow needs are. And then we'll send this out for also a larger review so everybody can, other people who are interested in commenting and adding information and helping hone this, it will be available for that. Here are the 6 reaches, okay? And largely divided by reservoirs. The Chama headwaters to Elvado, Chama below Elvado, Chama below Abiquiu, this Cuesta to Velarde Reach, which is basically the confluence of the Chama. I'm calling this White Rock Canyon Reach, which is from the Chama confluence to Cochiti, and the Middle Rio Grande. For each of these reaches, there's an indicator gauge. For New Mexico, for Middle Rio Grande, we've done 2. We've got Albuquerque and right below the Santa Acacia floodway gauge, just because it's a larger spatial extent. We want to hang the same hypothesis in 2 places. Okay. So what does this look like? This is a lot to take in here, but I just want to give you guys a flavor for the process that we're going through. And again, this is what this is here. This is from the Rio Chama. The Rio Chama, non-consumptive. So it's sort of really interesting. There, some environmental flows are not always consumptive flow regimes. And here we have different magnitude spring runoffs. What we as a sectoral community really enjoyed and really set with us about this hypothesis structure is it recognizes the paramount importance of the spring runoff and the spring runoff pulse. So they have a 10-year occurrence, a 5-year, and a 2-year. So a larger disturbance event, a 5-year occurrence, and a more of a bankful sort of 2-year one. And then it has minimum flow recommendations as well as a monsoonal pulse. And then here's describing for different reaches. You can't read this, obviously, but what the ecologic objectives are. Why is that important for the ecology? And the other thing I want to note here is this is a hypothesis, right? This is just like where you start, and you build out from this. And very much we're taking on the same approach. These are our reaches here again for the 6 reaches. And we've chosen these indicator species. This has been largely working with Brian Richter he has this volume of experience of doing these kind of workshops and working through environmental flow recommendations. And he has found that really if you can get a select species that represent the hydrograph within a given system, that's really better than doing like a dozen species. You can really hone on that. So we've taken that approach and it seems to be working. Some of them have more, like this one up here has more. We've done natives and non-natives. We have a brown trout, and I don't have time to get into that whole discourse we've had on that, but I think it's where we landed with that. For the Middle Rio Grande, we have 4. We have the silvery minnow, the cottonwood, southwest minnow flycatcher, and the sandhill crane. And I wanted to show you again a window into this process that we're going through. We're very much enmeshed in it now. For the Middle Rio Grande, we have those species. We feel like the cottonwood represents large spring pulse disturbance events, low flows for survival. The silvery minnow as well is hooked into the spring pulse and a certain timing of the spring pulse and recessional limb, and low flows for survival. The flycatcher for spring pulse for wet floodplain soils, and then low flow needs. And then we've added the sandhill crane. This was largely because of this last fall we saw in November, December, the flows came up to 2,000 CFS, and a lot of this roost habitat was inundated. So this is actually going to be defining that, hey, we need low flows in fall and winter, but not too high. So, and then this is the working sheet that we're working in, very much similar to that Rio Chama one, where each of the teams is working through their different recommendations. So this is for the Middle Rio Grande. I'm giving you a sneak preview into this. These numbers are not vetted. This is just our first run at this. But here are 2 spring runoff events, and then more of a bankful 2-year occurrence event, and then minimum flows. And in this table that we're working in, we talk about the recurrence, we talk about the duration, and also the recessional limb, the season and timing, the ecologic objectives, and then this is something that Dagmar really wanted us to add in terms of Dagmar Llewellyn is really steeped in resilience theory, so we're really benefiting from that. And this idea of what if we don't get that flow? What would the evidence of transformation be? Such as dying senescent cottonwood forests. Silvery minnow numbers below thresholds, that sort of stuff. And then this final column here is potential opportunities and limitations to implement the environmental flows. So really important to understand the sideboards and what we can and can't do in the current system. And then we're collecting citations, and really we already have many of these. We're actually going to sort these and have an online citation directory for this report. And then Mark Briggs, this, again, a lot of text here, but I just want to give you a sense of this. Mark Briggs, who's the author from this, has done a lot of environmental flow work, is now taking that sort of initial run at it, and he's going in and really dissecting for like cottonwood, willows, bottomland forest. What do we know about timing of propagation in the reach? General description of the propagation flow. When we've gotten strong population, average peak of standard deviation, recessional limb, summer low flow. So he's dissecting that with citations, and he's really trying to dig out those citations. So that's where we can use help. When you review this, if you see stuff that we're missing that you think is really important, that would be very helpful. And then, you know, what we don't know, we're describing that as well. And then putting this into much more of a specific, similar to what I showed you before, but for the species in the reach, like the Rio Grande cottonwood, the Middle Rio Grande, what we're thinking, and we're just building this stuff out, just FYI. And then reasoning and source information. And then the silvery minnow, we're doing the same thing. So we've done it for all those indicator species, we're doing that and building it out into the report. Coupled with that, we've also benefited from, so we've got Brian Richter, we've also got University of California, Davis, Sam Sandoval, who's done this functional flow process. It's been used largely in California for environmental flows there. And he has done this analysis for the Middle Rio Grande. This came to us through the World Wildlife Fund again, through that report card effort. And he does this is hydrology information. So coupled with the species information, we're also looking at like, how did the river used to function? This is this naturalized hydrograph in blue here. And he has a whole statistical process and modeling effort that he does to reconstruct naturalized periods of records. And then the current conditions in 1990 to 2020 is what we're using for that. And what are the flows under the current conditions? And for these different, so this is just 3 spots in Albuquerque, Lobatos, and for equipment, you can see that, you know, the spring runoff used to rule. It's still kind of present in the Middle Rio Grande, right? It is, and it's sort of our benefit, I think. Largely absent for Lobatos and very much absent for equipment. But with these data and that analysis are these charts, and again, I'm blind you with the stuff, but what this shows you here, this is the naturalized conditions and the flow conditions versus the observed conditions. And it's just a way to understand the hydrology and how it's changed and what the current flows are. Like for spring peak flow. This is for, this gauge here is for the Taos Junction Bridge gauge up near Pilar. So just this information, we're using this as well. So synthesizing, taking that ecologic information, using the hydrology information as well as other USGS records. And then we want to put this all into some sort of table like this, and this is, again, these are draft numbers, so please, hopefully don't make, but we also want to, in this, recognize what is safe channel capacity in these different reaches, because for many of the reaches, we want to recognize, this is something that Kim and I have talked about a lot with some other folks as well, that the importance of recognizing the need for disturbance in the system. If we're not getting that, we need to have eyes wide open, but we want to try to estimate what does that disturbance need to actually affect that surface. So we're getting estimates of what we think that is in the different reaches. Some reaches we're using where there is hydraulic information available. Other reaches we're using more expert opinion as a place to start and maybe point towards some more hydraulic analysis. So this is where we're heading. Then we'll have recommendations for a high disturbance event for each reach, a 5-year recurrence event, a 2-year. Monsoons, we're having a hard time tying the monsoon flush down, and maybe it's less important because that usually comes in tributaries anyhow, but definitely the minimum flows. And we split the season out, April 1 to September 30th and October 1 to March 31st, and what we feel the minimum flows should be for those periods per reach. And I think what's going to pop, what I want to say, what's going to pop from this is going to be that some reaches, boom, it's all about how we don't have, the low flow is a real challenge in the real, some reaches it may not be much of a challenge, like this White Rock Canyon one, but some of them, when we look at current conditions versus our recommendations, parts of the hydrograph are going to pop out in terms of really needing primary focus for any sort of activities. This will be used then to talk about what strategies can be used. We have examples of strategies that have been used for environmental flows and what can be done in the different reaches, coupled with also reservoir operations and looking at reservoir operations and what could be done that could meet some of these objectives. So one last text thing. Environmental flow recommendations will represent our best current scientific hypothesis, what we think will be the best that we can do at least, and maybe I'm sure there's better out there for some of the reaches, based on available data analysis as to what the river needs for ecologic viability in the 6 reaches. This information will identify primary environmental flow deficits within each reach. Basin modeling then from the basin study will help us understand how these deficits are likely to change in the future with no action or with potential resiliency action. So this is all going to be forecast models that have been developed through the University of Massachusetts and then using ERGWAM as well. There's a monthly time step model that the University of Massachusetts has developed that can run many scenarios and really project out. And it has climate futures built into it. And then I also wanted to emphasize these last, so workshop and ensuing basin study process will compile and develop resiliency actions. This is all going to be in a report. Some of our recommendations will not be achievable. I just want to say that straight up. And then I just know, having worked in this business for decades, that you just have to say this over and over again. These recommendations are not a threat to water right holders or bankside landowners. I think it's often people, you see that knee-jerk reaction, oh, environmental flows are going to steal our water, or you say that needs 10,000 CFS. I mean, like below Abiquiu, we know you can't get above 1,800 CFS under current conditions there, and it's a very sensitive topic. We just need to, so I just want to point towards that we need to be really careful about how we roll this out, and we're thinking about that already, and making sure that this is just an assessment of what the river needs. And with that, does anybody know where that is? Any guesses? Hint? No? What's this bridge? That's Montano. That's Bosque. That's the Oxbow. This is after, I don't, this is always, I'm not a sort of soapbox. Do I have a couple minutes left here, or how much time?
You have like 4 minutes.
Well, then just real, sort of side note, okay? This is this last summer, post last year's runoff. Previous years, it was bank line to bank line on the jetty jacks with a little bit of bar development. This is similar to the trends that we're seeing, saw in the Isleta Reach, where these bars are developing, the river's becoming more sinuous. I know it's not, there's no easy picture here, but to me, it still is like kind of cool. It's cool. And birds, when the water came down, birds in January, birds were roosting all over this, and really has transformed this into a more complex and interesting river. Yeah. Andrew.
So loving all the work that you're doing, Paul, and loving also the fact that you have Brian Richter's many decades of wisdom on this. One of the things I was most impressed with was the eSWIM methodology, the ecologically sustainable water management, which is kind of just a Brian creation to allow you to go through a kind of an iterative process to make sure that, I mean, the step 1 was to define those ecoflow requirements without a reference to reality, right? Don't look at the levees, don't look at the floodplain, don't look at the reservoirs, but try to reconstruct that basic, hydro-bio connections. Is that still part of the methodology?
Sort of. I think we're taking a more middle road path to that. We've had a lot, because Brian actually, his thinking has evolved on that. And so I would say that we're more thinking we're recognizing the constraints. We're not asking for, a 30,000 or 40,000 CFS flood in Albuquerque, which would have been part of the hydrology 100 years ago. I think we're really much more trying to understand. So I would say much more, does that make sense? Much more middle path in terms of that. And then when we get to the constraints sections, we want to be very real about that and really have some very actionable stuff that we can do, which is out there. There's demonstrations actually. Once we started getting into this and having these meetings, there's some great work being done that hasn't gotten highlighted in different reaches that is helping the flow. So it's sort of both stuff. We also do want to think outside the box too, Andrew. But yeah. But again, like this is so different. Like we've talked about so much today, this is such a different system than it ever was. We're trying to recognize that this is an evolving ecosystem, river habitat, and try to have the flow recommendations be able to be manageable or adaptive to that, if that makes sense.
I love it, going from one novel ecosystem to a new novel ecosystem, right? In essence, you're trying to promote.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Paul? I think we've got time for one more. Shal?
Oh, that was me.
That's okay, Shal, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, if you're ready to go on, that's fine.
Excellent, Paul. Thanks for the presentation, and this looks like a really good matrix for people to use. But on bigger picture stuff, I'm starting to ask more and more, are we so hamstrung by existing water law, compact, agency rules and regs that to manage for environmental flows just really isn't a possibility in this system based on all these things? I mean, I hate to sound like the cynic here, but
No, it's good. It's a good question.
It's something I wrestle with a
No, it's
lot
a
with
good
my
question.
job.
Good question, Shell. I would say no because I'm the eternal optimist, the 30%, or the glass is 20% full, I don't know, 25. But I would say no, and we've done stuff that has been, like you look at 2016, why was that such a successful minnow year? It wasn't that big a runoff. They were able to hold the water in El Vado and release it differently, timing to make it work and really deal with the tail out, where bam, there were minnows everywhere. So it's been done. I think it points to what you're asking, though, points to what Adrian brought up before in this National Academy of Science study, the importance. So the basin study is limited, and then it's by design and by statute, I guess, or whatever, but it's only meant to work within existing constraints. And so, but we're already but we got this other world wildlife thing and sort of thinking outside the box. Having an analysis of all those rules and regs and really getting a hard look at that, I think is really going to be an important component as we do this sort of stuff as well. And I personally see a lot of opportunity, but I do think we need to not just go on myth, like, oh, we can't do that because, well, let's see where's the reservoir rule and what would it take to change that.
Great, thank
All
you.
right.